NFL news and notes are brought to you by BMW of Atlantic City. The ultimate driving experience is closer than you think at bmwofatlanticcity.com. We do have our poll question up at 973 ESPN on Twitter. What's your favorite era of the NBA? Is it the 80s with with Bird and Magic, although Jordan played in the 80s? Is it the 90s with Jordan Malone? Is it the 2000s with Kobe and Shaq? Is it right now with LeBron and Durant? Right now, the leader in the clubhouse, the old farts are winning. Think about that. Social media, old guys are winning right now. You young kids should be ashamed of yourselves. 31% of the old fogies like the 80s better than right now. All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Used to cover the NBA. Were you covering the 90s NBA there? Were you the Jordan Shaq or Jordan Malone years?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, I think you hit the nail on the head. Everybody thinks their generation is the best. I will say this. There has never been a more well-rounded player than LeBron James, no matter any era. As far as being skilled at so many parts of the game, that's as high as you get. And I've been saying it for years.
He's at the top of the heap right now, and hey, good for him. When people were critical of him, I don't think they were critical of him because they thought that he was not worthy. I think it's because they saw more in him, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. Early in his career, you had the lack of championships, and then when that went away, you had sort of the movement. You had to go to Miami to win one. Then he went back to Cleveland. So, you're always going to have your detractors no matter how good you are. But I think people should realize that there are other people on the floor. And no matter if it's LeBron or Michael Jordan or back to Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, no matter who you want to throw out there, you need teammates to win championships. So it's not just LeBron won this championship, Steph Curry won this one, so forth and so on. But too many people boil it down to that. I think you should understand that as far as, think about how many things LeBron James does as far as scoring, rebounding, passing, defensively. This is a guy who's guarded point guards, off guards, small forwards.
Hey, look, the things that I was critical about was not LeBron stinks. It was and he has done what I wanted to see because I thought he had more in them at times. This LeBron that we're watching now is not the one that we saw in Miami. This is a better one.
Yeah, well, I think he's improved. He's 32 years old, and that's another thing you gain with experience. And when you're still at the top of your athletic skills, you're going to get better and better and better until that starts to decline, which inevitably happens to everyone. So, yeah, he understands how to play better now than he did in the past. That's part of it. You get a feel for the game. You get a feel for your teammates. That's part of it.
Yeah.
By
the way, au contraire, John, we're getting better with age.
I agree with that. But we always say, and I always say with the Sixers, when you're looking for that superstar player, and you're going to hear a lot of talk in the coming months, should they sign Kyle Lowry, who's going to make a ton of money, and obviously he's not a superstar player. If you continuously wait for the next LeBron James, you're going to be waiting for a really, really, really long time.
And we were just talking about this before we get into some football stuff with John McMullen, who, of course, covered the NBA for a long time as well. We were just talking about this before you jumped on about Kobe, is that Kobe was so similar to Jordan. I think Kobe got underappreciated because of the unique similarities to Jordan.
Yeah, I agree with that. Similar players in that they were such dominant offensive players, and they both had that killer instinct. And I think that's another thing people didn't see in LeBron James. And, nobody's better closing games. If you're talking about the best closers, you're talking about players like Jordan and Kobe. But there's, it almost comes down to how you what do you want when you talk about the greatest player of all time? Do you want the great scorer? Do you want the clutch guy? Or do you want the more well-rounded guy who does everything so well? Or do you want the great defender? You know, even going back to Bill Russell, who dominated that way. So in a lot of ways, it just depends on your definition of great player.
All right, John, let's get into some NFL, because if you go to 973ESPN.com right now, you will see a concerning story if you're an Eagles fan. One of, wow, where did this come from? As the Philadelphia Inquirer reports, Brandon Graham has stopped attending the voluntary workouts and is expected to hold out to skip OTAs and possibly minicamp here. He's entering the third year of his 4-year, $26 million contract. He's going to make $6.5 million this year. Now, some people will look at Graham and say, oh, he's pretty good. But if you're a Pro Football Focus guy, he was the number 1 rated 4-3 end out of 53 qualifiers last year. And he was number 2 against the run. He was their number 1 pass rushing guy, which might have Eagles fans out there saying, what the hell does Pro Football Focus know then? But obviously somebody thought pretty high of Brandon Graham, and he heard the whispers, and he might not show up now.
Yeah, well, he's gone. So for now, but obviously the work now is voluntary, so it's not technically a holdout. And we'll see. The key date is June in the minicamp, which is mandatory. So if he skips that, it's a holdout. And you know, I talked about this, if you remember, Mike. This was a possibility way back before the draft, simply because, and I was talking to Josh off air, comparing it to Seinfeld when George's secretary got a raise and made more money than he does. That's what this is about. Vinny Curry's backup makes more money, and that's untenable. So in a lot of ways, Vinny Curry's failure is what created this, because you can't go into a season you know, with Vinny being your backup and you make less money.
So
I understand.
Let me ask you real quick, though.
Brandon's upset.
Yeah. Did they view Curry as the better player at this point last year? Did they view Curry as the better player?
Yes. Yes, they did. No question.
So that's a monumental fail then, right? On somebody's part.
Yeah, it is. I mean, throughout the offseason, when the Eagles talked about their defensive line last year, it was Vinny Curry and Connor Barwin were going to be the starters, and Brandon Graham was going to be the rotational guy who mixed in on both sides. And part of it was Brandon had not played up to his ability as a former first-round pick for the majority of his career, but he took off last year, and he was great. And you don't have to just look at Pro Football Focus. He was a second-team All-Pro. Everybody knows how well he played last season. The Eagles know how well. There's no more talk about, you know, obviously Connor Barwin's gone. There's no more talk about Vinny Curry potentially beating out Brandon Graham. There's no talk that Chris Long's going to take snaps away from him. They understand the type of player he's developed into. Now you just kind of have to fix things. And in a lot of ways, you know, maybe the prudent thing would have been to move on from Vinny Curry and just release him, and then you don't have this issue. Although, judging by where he is in the game now, there's no question Brandon Graham is underpaid. And from that standpoint, players don't have a lot of leverage, and the little leverage they do have is to skip off-season work.
This is a tough one because Graham is 29 years old. He's halfway through a 4-year deal. He signed that back in 2015, by the way. He's got a cap number of 7.5. So does it behoove the Eagles, who are in cap problems anyway, to sit at the table with Brandon Graham and try to figure something out?
Probably not, and they probably don't have to be honest. They could play hardball, and ultimately Brandon's going to show up for training camp. If he skips mini camp, which is 3 days, he could be fined basically about $80,000. So you could take that hit and it wouldn't affect you that much. But once they start to pile up in training camp, it becomes significant. And I don't think it will last long if it even reaches that far. But then there's the potential of having an unhappy player. And I do think the Eagles need to address it in some way, whether it's giving him a small bump to get him back ahead of Curry, whether it's trading or releasing Vinny Curry. Again, you can't have a backup making more than a second-team All-Pro. That's just not how this stuff works.
Can you quantify to the listeners out there? I mean, Graham had 5.5 sacks. By no means are those numbers eye-popping. How I mean, Pro Football Focus, I'm not telling you to give me their formula, their mathematical equation of how they found this out, but to try to paint the picture to the listeners as to why a guy with 5.5 sacks was deemed to be so valuable by this publication.
Well, you have to realize, and sacks is sort of one of the most overrated statistics in football. And a lot of it, you have to rely on your teammates. And I often put at it, Brandon led the entire NFL in hurries last year, and that's a better indication that he was putting consistent pressure on the opposing quarterback. Often, if you watch the Eagles on film, you'll see Brandon Graham or Fletcher Cox doing their job on the pass rush, and the other two guys were not on the defensive line. And what that enables the quarterback to do is either climb the pocket or flush left, flush right, get away from the pass rush. You don't have a sack, but Brandon Graham did his job. The realization was more than not Connor Barwin, Benny Logan were not doing their job on the pass rush. And the Eagles realized that, and people around the league realized that.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Read the piece on Brandon Graham right now on our website. Don't forget, follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter. He's got his NFL coverage over at FanRag Sports NFL. You can get all of the National Football League coverage. And we touched on this a little bit, yesterday in terms of the league. We were talking a lot about how we're consuming the league differently and things like that. And we'll get to some NFL news and notes here in just a second. But you wrote, and Pete asked you the question yesterday about the current television landscape in the NFL. You write that it has the NFLPA spooked a little bit here. If you can, I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, today about the fact that, does this suggest when they say spooked that they're concerned about potential salaries down there? Because we're talking about holdout situation and money and cap problems. Are they looking at a possibility where the NFLPA is saying, hey, our players might not be able to make the money that they're currently making?
Yeah. I mean, that's what they're concerned about because they get a cut of revenue. And when it comes to the TV contracts, which if you add them all up are over $7 billion this year, that's a lot of money. The players get 55% of that. Now, in theory, that's never gone down in the past. But if we continue to go the way we are, and the new, if companies like YouTube and Netflix and Hulu eventually step up and replace NBC, ABC, ESPN, whatever, doesn't matter. If they're willing to pay the same amount of money, doesn't matter who's writing the check. But if they're not, and all of a sudden we're 5-10 years down the road and that golden goose has dried up, and all of a sudden $7 billion turns into $3 billion, they're still getting 55%. Yeah. So they're getting 55% of $3 billion instead of $7 billion.
Do you see a change in the television landscape in terms of the current setup? Thursday night, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, Sunday night, Monday night. Do you see that changing?
No, certainly not Sunday. And the one thing you would look at is the weekly Thursday games, but the NFL has been consistent. They think it's a success, and it's certainly garnered them more money. So as long as the money is there, they're not going to move off of Thursday night. And I think the tradition of both Sunday and Monday is certainly not going to change.
What about Monday? I mean, I know that's been around for a while, but ESPN's taking a bath on that, right? I mean, what if they said, look, can we get out of this? We just can't do it anymore. We're going to go under as a company. I mean, that might not happen, but just to say they did. Could ESPN just say, look, we cannot financially handle Monday Night Football any longer? Is that a possibility?
No, I mean, they're contractually obligated through the current deal, which ends, I think, in 2022. So they have to pay that money no matter what. Now, once it's up for bid again.
What if they didn't have it? What if they didn't have it? What if they just said, look, we just cannot pay you any longer. I'm sorry, we can't do it.
Well, then you're talking about bankruptcy.
Right.
But if you look at, Disney as a whole, they just came out with their quarter earnings. They're still making gobs of money. ESPN itself was down 3%. So in a situation where you would look at bankruptcy, and there's companies all the time that declare bankruptcy and don't have to pay. That's not a situation where we're in or even close to being in with ESPN. They're still wildly profitable. It's just not nearly as profitable as they once were. So it's not a concern now. It's more of a concern when the next TV contract comes up and where we are as far as the landscape.
Yeah.
If things continue and there's a lot more cord cutters and streaming becomes a bigger deal, then it really comes down to, as I said, whether it's YouTube or Hulu or somebody of that nature, are they willing to pay similar money as what the traditional TV networks have done? And that's the big question, and nobody knows the answer.
No, I mean, I agree. I'm just trying to throw some, because you write this article, I think it's pretty interesting because I don't see the Sunday format going away. Obviously, the ones in the Forge, they're not going anywhere. I don't see the Sunday night going anywhere. That's probably, right now, that's the league's bread and butter, right? The Sunday night football game is the biggest thing they got.
Yeah, Sunday night football is now what Monday night football used to be years ago, before it moved off of regular network television. That was the game of the week. And now it's Sunday night football is the game.
But also from a ratings standpoint, right? That's their biggest ratings is Sunday night.
Yeah. And it's usually number one in all of television for the entire season. So it's still, hey, the NFL is a lot better off than most people as far as we always talk about ratings. They lost about 8% last year. And I do think a lot of that had to do with the presidential election. And now that that's not going to be in the mix this fall, I think there will be a bounce back. So in a lot of ways, the NFL is still looked at by television executives as the one DVR-proof programming option left, and live sports as a whole, the NBA as well, especially the playoffs. And there's very few that can guarantee eyeballs and eyeballs paying attention to advertising. That's the most important thing, because people might watch shows, whatever your favorite show is, but they do it so much on DVRs now that they just can fast forward through the advertisements. And if they stop it and they don't allow you to do it, people just don't pay attention and they get angry. And that's the concern. How do you get advertising in front of people who don't want to watch it? And it's very, very difficult.
So, I mean, again, you look at this story, which I find it's a great story, by the way, about the television and the where this league is going. We all go back to the Thursday night and say, well, then that's the one that's going to go away eventually. Where do we see the football dropping? Is it Fox? Is it NBC? Is it Thursday night? Is it ESPN? Where would the first domino fall, in your opinion? Because I agree with you, by the way. The Sunday's not going. The Sunday night's not going anywhere. That's number one on the list. That's not moving. Monday night I could see because ESPN is in a rocky situation. Thursday night, I think everybody says get rid of. We don't care, but the league obviously values Thursday, so it seems like, okay, where would there be the concern?
Yeah, I still think Thursday would go before Monday. I mean, the hope is if ESPN no longer wants Monday Night Football, somebody else does. and that's always the hope, that if they're not willing to pay, CBS will, or even something like TNT or TBS that has never had football before. Maybe they'd be willing to step up. So that's the hope, that somebody's always willing to step up. And that goes for Monday night as well as Thursday night. However, if you're asking me which is more likely to go away in the future, it's Thursday, because of the lack of tradition and the fact that even today, even though Monday Night Football isn't what it once was, it still dwarfs Thursday night as far as ratings go.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's interesting. Read the article, J.F. McMullen on Twitter. The league is kind of changing, and you wonder if another entity steps up where the league would try to squeeze another game in. You know what I mean?
Well, I think they would be wise to stop that. I think it's already oversaturated, and you got to be very careful. I mean, it's tough to turn down money, and that's essentially what happened on Thursday night. Is people are willing to pay for it, and if people are willing to pay for it, you generally want to take that money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just natural. But you do have to kind of weigh and say, are we overexposing? Is this, are we being penny wise and dollar foolish? Is this going to hurt the popularity of the game at some point down the road? To this point, the NFL thinks not. It's still by far the most popular sports league in this country. So I think for the most part, they've been proven right.
Right. I mean, really, the only other thing they could potentially do is add, a second Monday night football game, or a 10 o'clock in the morning Sunday game, something to that effect.
Yeah, and they, remember, week one, they have the doubleheader on Monday night. They have 2 games now. And the London games, they aren't keeping with the early start. So there's an extra game during those weeks, starting at whatever it is, 9:30 in the morning. So the windows, they keep putting more games on there. And I don't know if that's a good thing. I personally don't think it is, but they haven't hit the saturation point where people aren't willing to pay for it. And until that happens, it's going to continue.
A couple quick NFL news and notes. The Patriots extended a 1-year, $1.1 million tender to LeGarrette Blount. He got the May 9 tender there. So, what's that?
Well, that basically makes things more difficult for LeGarrette Blount, because May 10th is the day where you can sign a player and it doesn't count for the compensatory formula. So what that means is, if you sign a high-profile free agent from another team, you're potentially giving up a compensatory pick if you lost a high-profile free agent. So you saw Michael Floyd finally sign today. That's because he no longer counts against Minnesota's potential compensatory picks, and that's why you have a little more interest. You'll probably see other guys. We talked about the running backs, D'Angelo Williams, somebody like that. He's more likely to sign now. So it's basically just going to make it more difficult for LeGarrette Blount, because he's still under that tag where someone's going to have to give up, definitely, because of the season he had, 18 touchdowns, a compensatory pick if they want to sign him.
And according to the Herald, Boston Herald, Blount has no plans to sign this tender here with the Patriots, but very rarely used this tender is. And, of course, the Patriots are the one that dug it out of the grave and said, here you go, take this one on for size. All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and check it out, FanRag Sports NFL. Great piece on the television landscape, which I find to be a very interesting rainbow down there. Something's at the end of that tunnel that we are going to see change here in a couple of years. John, take care, pal.
Hey, thank you, Mike.